Hi, I'm a corporation. What's that, you may ask? Corporations are groups of merchants or traders united in a trade guild. Some examples of us are Walmart stores, ExxonMobil, and Chevron. We immense organizations have extreme amounts of money, and because of past U.S. Supreme Court rulings, we have been granted some of the same rights as you, living, breathing citizens. Because of this, we are allowed to donate unbounded amounts of money into your campaigns and elections.
While this might not seem like too huge of an issue, these corporations began to hold more power in our society than the people themselves. Corporations have begun to buy over politicians so that these organizations have control over our government.
Isn't the United States of America supposed to be a democracy ran by the people, for the people, not a society controlled by corporations?
Back when corporations were first created, they had to be granted a charter from the government. This charter allowed the corporation to work on a single project for a limited amount of time. After this time elapsed and the project was completed, these corporations dissolved, unless another charter was given to them. Today, however, these monstrous organizations are not disbanded after their initial project is completed. They are allowed to continue on as a legal entity for an unrestricted amount of time.
Along with their lifespan, corporations' intentions have also shifted. Instead of being used for specific governmental projects, corporations hold only one main interest: making profit.
These new characteristics of corporations are extremely dangerous in our society. They're absorbing an incredible amount of money that they're spending in our elections for unmoral purposes.
An example that shows that corporations have too much power in our elections can be found in just this past election. California's Proposition 37, which would have labeled genetically modified foods, went into the voting polls in 2012. The proposition was rejected, but not by people's votes alone. Monsanto, one of the largest and most influential corporations in the food industry, put in around $8 million in funding towards No on Prop 37. Monsanto's single contribution added up to nearly all of the money spent for Yes on Prop 37. With this funding, No on Prop 37 was able to quintuple the funding spent on the proponent's side.
This decision really wasn't based on just the people themselves. Take a look at the funds they spent. There's no way we could compete against that. And their spending, they spent so much money it masked the truth. And the truth was what we were trying to get at all the time.
Those were the words of Stacy Malkin, the media director of Yes on 37. Does this situation seem ethical? You do the math.
Okay, so this is just a brief summary of Citizens United versus the Federal Election Commission, and I think the case was decided in 2010, and as you probably know, this is a landmark case because it's changed a lot of issues. I mean, I think it's made a huge impact on our democratic system, but just a brief summary of the facts of the case. Citizens United, from what I remember, they're a very right-wing organization that's partially funded by a corporation, but they are they're nonprofit. And I think during the last election in 2008, they produced a film called Hillary, and the film was basically just to discredit the Hillary Clinton campaign. And the issue was they wanted to broadcast this film on demand. I think it was on demand. And at the time, there was a law that restricted these corporations from making political speeches, and political speech is considered what Citizens United did, which is a movie that was about the campaign. And so they brought it to the court, and they asked the court, can we show it? Can we film this movie can we broadcast it on demand? And the lower court told them no. They said, no, you're actually, because of this certain law at the time, you would be restricted from broadcasting this film. And so the case eventually went up to the Supreme Court, and there was a number of discussions, and it was a really big case. And eventually, in 2010, the court decided that the government is not allowed to prohibit corporations from making certain kinds of political expenditures because, even if they were supporting or denouncing a certain political candidate, they would still be allowed based on whatever it is that they're doing. They should be allowed to make those expenditures. And this is a big case because in the past, corporations they were allowed to make independent expenditures, but they weren't allowed to make political contributions. And so this is a landmark case that really made an effect on democracy. I think in my opinion, it made a big effect on the whole one person, one vote idea, because if you continue to allow corporations to make these kinds of speeches, it can have a really heavy influence or tremendous impact on the outcome of an election. So I think that was the biggest concern of people, is really how is this impacting democracy now if we're allowing corporations to have such a huge say or such a huge actually they're giving a lot of power. If you're allowing to if you're allowing corporations to actually denounce or to support a certain candidate, then it could eventually have a huge impact on who can win, because corporations are rich. Most of the corporations that we have in our country are very rich. And so the case held that corporations should not be prohibited from making these political spendings. And in essence, I think what people are going crazy about is that the impact of the case made it so that corporations now have this new sense of dignity as a person. The case basically gave corporations a title as having a person, because free speech is protected by individuals, and that now corporations are allowed to do what persons have been always allowed to do.
In January 2010, the Supreme Court issued its opinion in Citizens United versus FEC. 2 months later, the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals decided the Speech Now versus FEC case. These two cases gave rise to the super PACs. Millions of dollars now pour into negative and misleading campaign ads, and often without disclosing the true source of the donations. But our campaign finance system was hardly a model of democracy before these disastrous opinions. The Citizens United and Speech Now decisions renewed our concerns about campaign finance. But the court laid the groundwork many years ago. We can go all the way back to 1976. That year, the court held in Buckley versus Vallejo that restricting independent campaign expenditures violates the First Amendment right to free speech. In effect, that money and speech are the same thing. The damage is clear. Elections become more about the quantity of the cash and less about the quality of ideas, more about the special interests and less about public service.
Also, it's very disturbing for me to just, allow corporations to have that much of an impact or that much of an influence on our political system.
Can a building have moral opinions? Can a building have social responsibility? If a building can't have social responsibility, what does it mean to say that a corporation can? A corporation is simply an artificial legal structure.
Corporate spending in our elections, in my opinion, reduces our democracy and our personal freedoms. If corporations are allowed to spend unlimited money influencing campaigns, that's not the freedom that we were hoping for. I think that is correct. If there is in Napa, for instance, if a person wants to do a big housing development in the county of Napa, very, very difficult to get it done. But if you give $1 million to a number of candidates on the city council and they get elected, well, they owe you a favor. So when that issue comes up, they're very likely to work in your favor on that because of the money that you spent. That's not democracy. What does Ben & Jerry's think about corporate spending? Ben & Jerry's has launched a campaign, Get the Dough Out of Politics, for exactly the same specific reasons that were previously mentioned. They do not feel it is right for corporations or wealthy individuals to be able to donate unlimited campaign funds that aren't even transparent. Nobody even knows where the money comes from. There's no record of it whatsoever. It's just wrong. So that is Ben & Jerry's campaign stand, and they have to get a certain number of signatures before this has to become a constitutional amendment to get this law changed. And they're 1/3 the way there already.
Under the Constitution, would you say that corporations should be counted as people?
I'm also going to say the question is, under the Constitution, should corporations be counted as people or individuals? And I'm going to say no to that, because the Constitution it's the backbone of our society, and it was written by our forefathers with the idea that we want to protect our individuals. I mean, the first 10 amendments are the Bill of Rights that protect inherent individual rights. And so the Constitution thinks that there's certain rights that belong to people that are so sacred that they want to keep it, they want to protect it. And some of these rights include the freedom of speech, the right to religious affiliation, the freedom to assemble, and the freedom of association. And so in that sense, I think that corporations shouldn't be considered as persons, because they don't have the same inherent rights as humans. They don't have the same protection that humans should have. And also, it's really important to remember what a corporation is. A corporation is an entity that's created by people. It's actually a creation of the law. And so if you think about it in that way, a corporation is made up of people, but as a whole, it's recognized as a totally different entity. And so the Constitution, if we want to protect individual rights, the influence that corporation would have is totally different than what a person would have, because it's an entity that has a purpose of a specific, they have a specific interest, and so it's not the same as having one person and then a corporation that has multiple interests in mind. Mm-hmm. And so I don't think that under the Constitution a corporation should be counted as a person.
No, corporations aren't people. They don't have souls. They don't have consciences. They're a mechanism by which people organize their behavior, but they're not people. And the way in which the court has given them power creates immense imbalance, because they can use their corporate treasuries. And if you've got corporations like ExxonMobil that are making billions of dollars a quarter, it's pretty easy to drown out regular folks in the media market that we have.
Of all people, you, Mr. President, have some of the most influential power in our society. Even if it's just voicing your opinion, millions hear what you have to say and recognize the issues you choose to address. What we ask of you today is that you propose an amendment to Congress that will amend the Constitution so corporations do not hold the same rights as human American citizens.
This way they will not be able to spend such massive amounts of money in politics and further corrupt our system.
Corporations should not be able to spend unbounded amounts of money into our elections. They drowned out the voice of the people, making our voice only slight whispers in comparison to the corporations' opinions.
Is the United States of America not a democracy?
Why do we let corporations speak and make decisions for us, just because they have the money to do so?
This nation is founded upon we the people, not we the corporations.